G'day folks, and welcome back to the channel. Today we've got another rock and roll list video. Here I'll be looking at 30 bands who had, or in many cases are still having, a lineup that's lasted for more than a quarter of a century, 26 years at least, as of the year 2025. To best explain what I'm talking about, I'll begin the list right now. Hanson, 32 years and counting. Being a band of brothers, Isaac, Taylor, and Zach Hanson from Tulsa, Oklahoma, have basically been together since the birth of their youngest member, but I've started their career with the time of their first professional performances under the name Hanson in 1993. Of course, the trio are best known for their 1997 bubblegum earworm Mbop and the subsequent album Middle of Nowhere, which went on to sell 10 million copies, and all of this when the oldest band member was just 16. And while their star faded to the public at large from then on, they have never stopped recording or touring. Now fully independent, they have a dedicated following called Fansons, tour the world with their extended family in tow, and have even released their own brand of beer called Hops. But Hanson are disqualified because they require extra musicians, most notably a bass player to fulfill live dates and recordings. Though two members, Andrew Perusi and Demetrius Collins, have been permanent since 2007, so that's pretty good going. So that's how it works. To be included in this list, a group has to have a stable core lineup of vocals, bass, drums, guitar or guitars, and maybe even keyboards as well. Although now I'm going to present some names on the screen of groups who miss out because they didn't or haven't yet had a consistent self-contained lineup that's lasted for 26 years. Also, I'm excluding bands that have technically been together for decades but have had lengthy periods of inactivity. The Strokes, Blur and Motley Crue are three that immediately spring to mind. This list is about working bands doing the grind, for the most part, and it's all just a bit of fun, so please try not to take it too seriously. As we say in Australia, we're not playing for sheep stations here. And just quickly, a big thank you to my good friends Rose, David, Milton and Django for coming up with some cracking suggestions that I wouldn't have thought of myself. Okay, here we go, and it's in reverse order of longevity, mostly. Now I need to get this one out of the way first because it's a little bit complicated. Neil Young and Crazy Horse, at least 26 years. Canadian folk rocker / granddaddy of grunge Neil Young's association with LA band Crazy Horse, or more specifically Neil Young, Billy Talbot and Ralph Molina, began way back in 1969 and is still ongoing. But Neil Young and Crazy Horse have always been about two guitars, bass and drums, and the most enduring second guitarist that the band ever had was Frank Poncho Sampedro. He joined in 1975, but it was always very much an on-again, off-again deal with the group. Here are the years that I worked out that the four-piece were going, with Young and Sampedro together. Now, to save you pausing and figuring it out, it adds up to 27 years in total, but it's hard to say just how many of those years the band were actually active. That being said, the two constants of Crazy Horse, bassist Billy Talbot and drummer Ralph Molina, have been together for 57 years and counting. That's mighty impressive. Number 30, Sonic Youth, 26 years. Formed in 1981, the lineup of Kim Gordon, Thurston Moore, Lee Ronaldo, and later addition Steve Shelley were together from 1985 to 2011. This noisy and highly influential New York alternative band split up when Thurston Moore and Kim Gordon's marriage ended after 27 years. 29. Slade, 26 years. When the quartet of Noddy Holder, Jim Lee, Dave Hill and Don Powell first started making records in 1966, it was as a band called the In-Betweens. They later changed their name to Ambrose Slade and soon just Slade, but it's the same members, just like how Spinal Tap were once the Thamesmen. Slade were absolutely huge. This hard-rocking quartet from Wolverhampton had 13 top 5 singles in the UK, with 6 of them going to number 1. And in my opinion, Noddy Holder is one of the greatest rock vocalists of all time. They're still going, by the way, with guitarist Dave Hill being the only original member. 28. Styx, 26 years and counting. Chicago arena rockers Styx formed way back in 1972, lasted for over a decade, split up, got back together for another couple of years, then reformed again in the 1990s. Original vocalist keyboardist Dennis DeYoung quit in 1999 and was replaced by Lawrence Gowan, and he's still there. Two members that have been with Styx since day one have been bassist Chuck Panozzo and guitarist vocalist James J.Y. Young. Second guitarist Tommy Shaw has been around since 1975 and drummer Todd Sucherman since 1995. 27. Pearl Jam, 27 years and counting. Formed in Seattle, Washington in 1990, the lineup of Eddie Vedder, Mike McCready, Jeff Ament, Stone Gossard and Matt Cameron have been together since 1998. Prior to Matt Cameron joining, these hugely popular American rockers had gone through 4 previous drummers. Pearl Jam aren't showing any signs of slowing down, and as far as Seattle grunge goes, they're the last band standing. 26. UB40, 28 years. This reggae pop outfit from Birmingham, England, contained the core of Ali Campbell, his brother Robin Campbell, Brian Travers, Mickey Virtue, Earl Falconer, Jimmy Brown, Norman Hassan, and a bloke known simply as Astro. Beginning life as a politically charged outfit, UB40 ended up having huge success with a series of pleasant cover songs. However, after having been an extremely united team for decades, lead vocalist Ali Campbell left after disputes with management over the way they were doing business. UB40 then recruited Ali and Robin's older brother Duncan to take over vocal duties, which he did until 2021. And as we speak, Ali Campbell is touring live under the name UB40, featuring Ali Campbell. And the other UB40 is still going as well, but with another lead singer. It's all just a bit messy. 25. Living Colour, 28 years and counting. Having formed in 1984, this heavy, funky and very creative rock band from New York City have had a couple of lives. The current configuration of Vernon Reid, Corey Glover, Will Calhoun and Doug Wimbish have been constant since their reformation in the year 2000. However, this lineup also existed from 1992 to 95. The band still tours and promise that a 7th studio album will soon appear. 24. Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, 28 years and counting. Nick Cave began his career in Melbourne, Australia with punk new wave band The Boys Next Door. They morphed into the Chaotic Birthday Party, and with the dissolution of that group, Cave assembled a backing band known as the Bad Seeds. It's worth noting that for more than 3 decades, Nick Cave had Mick Harvey by his side, playing whatever instrument was required at the time. Guitar, drums, bass, keyboards, xylophone, you name it. And also handling production, songwriting, musical arrangements and management duties. The pair parted company in 2009 after 36 years of making music together. But the members of the Bad Seeds who are currently active since at least 1997 are Cave himself, drummer Thomas Wilder, who's been a Bad Seed for 40 years, Martin P. Casey, 35 years, Jim Sklavanos, 31, and multi-instrumentalist Warren Ellis, 28 years and counting. Now, there's no permanent guitarist amongst that lot, which would usually disqualify a band here, but the man known as the Sinatra of Goth's music is a little more eclectic than your average rock outfit, so that core of 5 players will do just fine. And speaking of Warren Ellis, his quote-unquote other band, instrumental outfit The Dirty Three, comprising himself, Mick Turner and Jim White, have been together unchanged since 1992, making it 33 years and counting. In fact, they only just released their 10th studio album in 2024. 23. Coldplay, 28 years and counting. This is a nice, uncomplicated one. Coldplay was formed in London back in 1997, comprising Chris Martin, Johnny Buckland, Guy Berryman and Will Champion, and they've never really stopped since then. In 2024, they released their 10th studio album, Moon Music, and whilst touring it in my home city of Melbourne, Australia, they were forced to go on stage without their bassist Guy Berryman, who'd fallen ill. A sound technician was brought in to stand in for him, and this was the first time in their history that the combo had not performed live as a full complement. Coldplay employ a practice of splitting their songwriting credits equally amongst every group member, which is a smart move if you want to keep your band together. 22. The Grateful Dead, 30 years. The Dead's core unit of Jerry Garcia, Bob Weir, Phil Lesh and Bill Kreutzmann remained unchanged for 3 full decades. However, San Francisco's finest had a habit of having keyboard players, well, basically dying on them at very early ages, namely Ron Pigpen McKernan, Keith Godcho and Brett Midland. But the band also had other members who jumped on board along the journey, including a second drummer, Mickey Hart, who lasted for decades, and external lyricists, Robert Hunter and John Perry Barlow. But the four central members, Garcia, Weir, Lesh and Kreutzmann, were there from the start and stayed until the very end of the strange, winding, psychedelic, fantastic American odyssey that was the Grateful Dead. 21. Tool, 30 years and counting. LA alternative prog metal band Tool formed in 1990, but the lineup that settled in 1995, comprising Maynard James Keenan, Adam Jones, Danny Carey and Justin Chancellor, has been the one that's seen the group win a fistful of Grammy Awards and blow people away with their highly theatrical live performances. You're either a Tool fan or you're not, but either way, they're another band that have managed to keep creating and evolving for over 3 decades. 20. The Cure, 30 years and counting. Goth, pop, post-punk band, call them what you will, The Cure were formed in Crawley, West Sussex as a trio back in 1978, and it's a core of 3, Robert Smith, Simon Gallup and Jason Cooper, that have remained unchanged since 1995. Now, keyboards have been an integral part to The Cure's sound for years now, and it's worth noting that Roger O'Donnell has been their keyboard player for 27 non-consecutive years. It's also worth mentioning that bassist Simon Gallup was a very early band member and later rejoined them, and in total he has been with The Cure for 42 years. Now that's a decent stretch. And in late 2024, the band released their 14th studio album, Songs of a Lost World, to much critical and commercial acclaim, so it doesn't look like The Cure are going away at any time soon. 19. Rammstein, 31 years and counting. A leading example of Neue Deutsche Hart, or NDH, basically New German Hardness, this intense, fiery, somewhat provocative metal sextet from the German capital of Berlin comprise Till Lindemann, Richard Kruspe, Paul Landers, Oliver Riedel, Christoph Schneider and Christian Flacker Lorenz. A great example of a band who know what they are and remain solid. They also let individual members indulge in side projects without any interference. A bit like a relationship where someone says, I think we should see other people. In Rammstein's case, it works. 6 members unchanged in 31 plus years. You can't argue with that. 18. Muse, 31 years and counting. This alternative epic prog band from the English town of Teignmouth in Devon formed in 1994 as Rocket Baby Dolls, consisting of Matt Bellamy, Chris Wolstenholme and Dominic Howard. They really hit their straps in the early 2000s with albums that were both critically acclaimed and commercially successful, and only got bigger as time went on. Sold out stadium shows aplenty, #1 albums in over 20 countries, Brit Awards, Grammys, and 30 million record sales worldwide. And the best thing is they keep on challenging themselves to keep their music fresh and interesting. I've now got 3 bands from Down Under, 2 Aussies and 1 bunch of Kiwis. And the first one is 17. You Am I, 32 years and counting. Sydney power pop band You Am I were formed in 1989, and the lineup of Tim Rogers, Andy Kent and Rusty Hopkinson have been going since 1993. They were joined by second guitarist Davey Lane in 1999 and are still going strong. And they're the first Aussie group to have 3 albums in succession enter the charts at #1. 16. She Had, 34 years. This alternative metal outfit from New Zealand's capital Wellington formed in 1988 with their lineup of John Toogood, Tom Larkin, Phil Knight and Carl Kippenberger have been going since 1991. Though for 3 years, just after 9/11, they were known as Pacifier when they were trying to crack the US market. She Had announced that they are doing one final tour in 2025, and after that, they're calling it quits. 15. Spiderbait, 36 years and counting. These noisy Aussie rockers formed in the small New South Wales town of Finley back in 1989, and their lineup of Janet English, Cram, and Damien Whitty are still very much active. Spiderbait are best known for their amped up version of Lead Belly's Black Betty, a #1 hit in Australia, which also made 28 on the US Billboard mainstream rock chart back in 2004. 14. Def Leppard, 33 years and counting. Sheffield's Def Leppard were formed in 1977 as Atomic Mass, which featured bassist Rick Savage and vocalist Joe Elliott. A year later, they were joined by a 15-year-old drummer named Rick Allen, and would soon become one of the key bands of what would later become known as the new wave of British heavy metal, or NWOBHM. By 1982, they'd settled on a lineup with twin guitarists Steve Clark and Phil Collen and released their breakthrough album Pyromania. As they were recording the follow-up, drummer Rick Allen was involved in a serious car crash on New Year's Eve 1984 which severed his left arm. The arm was amputated and the group was put on hold for some time. However, Allen was dead set upon returning to the band and did so in 1986 thanks to his own phenomenal determination and a specially designed electronic drum kit. The subsequent next album, Hysteria, was an absolute blockbuster, selling 20 million copies worldwide. But in 1991, Steve Clark died of an alcohol and drug overdose, aged 30, and was replaced by Vivian Campbell in 1992. And this configuration of Def Leppard has continued ever since. Talk about resilience, it does not get any better than that. 13. Poison. 35 years and counting. Poison were just about the epitome of hair metal back in the late 1980s. They formed in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania in 1983, but a couple of years later, after relocating to LA, found themselves in need of a new guitarist and auditioned two potential axemen, C.C. DeVille and a bloke who called himself simply Slash. They went with DeVille, and the lineup of Bret Michaels, Bobby Dahl, Ricky Rocket and C.C. DeVille lasted from 1985 to 91 when DeVille was fired. He was welcomed back into the band in 1996 and the quartet have remained together ever since. 12. Green Day. 35 years and counting. Literally formed as a schoolboy garage band in Rodeo, California back in 1987 as Sweet Children with Billy Joe Armstrong, Mike Dirnt and a couple of other members, the addition of Trey Cool on drums in 1990 saw them stripped back to a punk power trio lineup, changed their name to Green Day, and they've never looked back. Multi-million selling albums, including a rock opera that was later turned into a Broadway musical, several Grammys, countless other awards, and eventually an induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame ensued. It's also worth noting that a second guitarist, Jason White, was brought in for live duties in the year 2000, and he's still with the band. In fact, he's been featuring on Green Day recordings since 2012. 11. Iron Maiden, 36 years and counting. Bassist, songwriter and keyboard player Steve Harris from East London formed Iron Maiden on Christmas Day 1975. They are another major part of the Nwabum movement. In 1976, Harris found what would become a permanent guitarist in Dave Murray, and then after 6 second guitarists came and went, in 1980 Adrian Smith became the one to play those crucial harmony twin lead guitar lines which is the band's signature sound. And then in 1981, Bruce Dickinson was recruited as vocalist, replacing Paul Di'Anno, who'd appeared on Maiden's first 2 albums. The final piece of the puzzle came to be when Nico McBrain joined on drums in 1983. In 1990, Adrian Smith left the group to be replaced by Janet Gers, and then Bruce Dickinson quit for 5 years. But in 1999, Iron Maiden released the greatest hits compilation entitled Ed Hunter, and all 6 members reconvened for a tour, and they've stayed together ever since, flying around the world with their singer in the pilot seat. 10. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band. 36 years and counting. The E Street Band were formed in 1972 to back up New Jersey singer-songwriter Bruce Springsteen, although the name didn't come about until September 1974, and all of Springsteen's studio albums are credited to just his name, even though he used basically the same personnel for both recordings and live performances. However, the boss always split the revenue from his live shows equally among himself and his bandmates, making him the fairest boss in rock and roll. Now, the longest lasting core membership of E Street that I could find was Springsteen himself, Gary Talent, Max Weinberg, Steven Van Zandt and Roy Bittan. They were all in the band together from 1976 to 84, some of 1995 and 1999 until now. Bassist Gary Talent has been around since day one, while drummer Max Weinberg joined in 1974, but there are a few other E Streeters that are definitely worth a mention. Saxophonist Clarence Clemens was there right from the get-go and continued until his untimely death in 2011, aged 69. The big man's sax lines are integral to many of Springsteen's iconic songs. His place in the group was filled by his nephew Jake Clemens, who's been there since 2012, a real family affair. Organist and accordionist Danny Federici was another foundation member whose tenure with the band only ended when he himself passed away in 2008, aged 58. 2 other E Street members that are worth noting are guitarist Nils Lofgren and vocalist, guitarist, keyboard player and the boss's own wife, Patti Scialfa. They both joined the group in 1994 and are still there. 9. Manic Street Preachers. 39 years and counting. This alternative rock band, for lack of a more florid description, formed in Blackwood in the south of Wales in 1986, comprising James Dean Bradfield, his cousin Sean Moore, Nicky Wire and bassist Mike Woodward. After 2 years, Woodward left and Nicky Wire switched to bass. And after releasing their debut single as a trio, the Manics were joined by Richie Edwards, their former driver/roadie, to provide lyrics, help with visual design and image, and play live rhythm guitar. The addition of Edwards as a lyricist elevated the band's intensity and creativity, and they released 3 albums in as many years, the first one a double, culminating in their most critically acclaimed work, 1994's The Holy Bible. Edwards had constant struggles with insomnia, alcohol, self-harm issues, anorexia and depression, and on February the 1st, 1995, on the day that the band were due to fly to America for a promotional tour, he went missing. He was 27 years old. Now, I won't go into any more details about that, you can look it up for yourself. Suffice to say, in 2008, he was officially declared dead in absentia. For 6 months after Richie's disappearance, the remaining band members kept the group on hold before deciding to soldier on, eventually reaching a higher level of commercial success than they ever had previously. And they're still going. 8. Cowboy Junkies, 40 years and counting. This folk rock/alt country combo came into being in a garage at the back of a rented house in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. Childhood friends Michael Timmins and Alan Anton had been in a couple of bands together, but they recruited Michael's brother Peter Timmins to play drums and sister Margot to handle vocals. The close proximity of their garage to a neighbouring household who kept complaining of the noise forced the group to pare down the volume and take a sparse approach to their music making, and this became their trademark. Cowboy Junkies recorded their first album completely live in the garage using one single microphone, a $9,000 Calrec Ambio Sonic belonging to an aspiring recording engineer that they'd recently met. Their second album was recorded in the same manner, but this time at the Church of the Holy Trinity in Toronto, using the room's rich natural reverb. It became 1988's The Trinity Session, a breakout hit, hitting number 28 on the Canadian album charts, 26 in the US and 73 in Australia. Their version of the Velvet Underground's Sweet Jane was so good that the song's author, Lou Reed, declared it to be his favourite version of the song. It's also worth noting that on that recording they were joined by a multi-instrumentalist named Jeff Bird. He's still in the band today. Cowboy Junkies have released consistent records in every decade, tour frequently and are still going strong. 7. Radiohead, 40 years and counting. Radiohead were formed at Abington Boarding School in Oxfordshire as On a Friday, because the students, they would jam in the school's music room on Friday afternoons. They consisted then, as now, of Tom York, Johnny Greenwood, his brother Colin Greenwood, Ed O'Brien and Philip Selway. Changing their name to Radiohead after a Talking Heads song, they had a hit with the grunge-inspired song Creep and then soon changed gears, becoming arguably the most wildly experimental and creative rock band of the 21st century. But not only has the quintet's core lineup not altered at all since their inception, they've also retained the same management, recording producers, live sound engineers, lighting and stage directors, graphic artists, the lot. A remarkable feat of stability. In 2011 they brought in an extra drummer, Clive Deemer, for live performances, and he's still there as well. 6. Rush, 41 years. Progressive hard rock band extraordinaire Rush were formed in Toronto, Canada way back in 1968, but by late 1974, after the release of their self-titled debut album, the group solidified into the trio of Geddy Lee, Alex Lifeson and Neil Peart. And from there, they just kept on going, releasing 18 studio albums and creating a following that is nothing short of cult-like. Rush are a band that you either absolutely love or are completely indifferent to. There is no middle ground. Their musical influence is undeniable. Rush were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2013, and when they ended their career in 2015, due to drummer Neil Peart's inability to play to the best of his ability, many consider that they went out on top of their game, especially since their final album, Clockwork Angels, was their best work in years. A class act all the way. Now, before I get into the top 5, I have to make mention of a certain band, and it's not so much an honourable mention, more a Lifetime Achievement Award. And that group is, ladies and gentlemen, the Rolling Stones. The Stones formed in 1962, before the two-word term rock music had even been coined. In fact, back then they considered themselves to be strictly rhythm and blues and not even a rock and roll band. But 63 years down the track, Mick Jagger and Keith Richards are still rolling. They lost drummer Charlie Watts in 2021. He'd been with the group for 58 years. And after the exits of second guitarist Brian Jones and later Mick Taylor, Ronnie Wood joined in 1975, and he's been there now for half a century. Now, the reason that the Stones can't be included in the main list is because bass players. Their longest-serving bassist has been Darryl Jones, 31 years and counting, although he's not officially a member of the Rolling Stones. It's complicated. Prior to him, Bill Wyman was with the band for just over 30 years. It's also worth noting that their current touring keyboard player, Chuck Leavell, has been playing with the Stones for 43 years. And sax player, the late Bobby Keys, was in the group on and off for over 30 years, from the late 60s until the 2010s. 5. King's Cross, 45 years and counting. You may well say, Kings who? Because they are certainly not the best known band on this list, but the funky prog metal trio King's Cross, originally from the town of Springfield, Missouri, have been together since 1980, comprising Doug Pinnick, Jerry Gaskill and Ty Tabor. Originally a top 40s cover band known as The Edge, with second guitarist Kirk Henderson, they soon ditched the cover songs and the fourth member, changed their name to Sneak Preview and released a self-titled debut album in 1983. In 1988, the trio settled on the name King's Cross and have released 13 studio albums, the last one back in 2022. Often described as musicians, they are cited as influences on heavy bands such as Smashing Pumpkins, Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. 4. Aerosmith, 49 years and counting. The way that they were going at one point, it seemed unlikely that a few members of this band would even live to be 49, let alone having 5 of them making music together for nearly half a century. Formed in Boston, Massachusetts, the lineup of Steve Tyler, Joe Perry, Tom Hamilton, Brad Whitford and Joey Kramer lasted for 9 years until drug issues and internal conflicts saw the departure of lead guitarist Joe Perry in 1979 and second guitarist Brad Whitford 2 years later. The quintet reconvened for a comeback tour in 1984, had a surprise crossover mega smash in 1986 with their Run DMC Walk This Way collab, and by the early 1990s found themselves to be just as big, if not bigger, than they had been in the 70s. In fact, Aerosmith are the highest selling American hard rock band of all time, with over 150 million record sales worldwide. The group retired from touring in 2024, but are technically still together as of the time of this video. 3. U2, 49 years and counting. In 1976, when 14-year-old aspiring drummer Larry Mullins Jr. posted a sheet of paper calling for musicians on the notice board of the Mount Temple Comprehensive School in Dublin, Ireland, could he have possibly imagined what it would lead to? Vocalist Paul Hewson, later known as Bono, was one student who answered the ad, as did bassist Adam Clayton and guitarist Dave Evans, later known as The Edge, and his older brother Dick. Calling themselves Feedback, they had their first performance in 1977, changed their name to Hype, and later U2 without second guitarist Dick Evans. In 1978, they acquired the services of manager Paul McGuinness, who would stay in the role for the next 35 years. And what can you possibly say about U2? Record sales that are estimated to be as high as 170 million worldwide, 22 Grammy Awards, a record for any group in history, tours and stage shows that reached insane levels of multimedia complexity. U2 delivered for decades and is still forging ahead. A new album is said to be in the making, with the band going back to their old-fashioned approach of playing live together in a room. And yes, they are another band who distributes their songwriting credits evenly. 2. Golden Earring, 51 years. For those of us who are not from the Netherlands, Golden Earring are something of a one-hit wonder, thanks to their 1973 smash Radar Love, in my opinion the greatest driving song ever, alongside The Doors' LA Woman. But in Holland, Golden Earring are nothing short of rock royalty, with 29 top 10 singles and 25 studio albums to their name. Formed in 1961 in The Hague by 13-year-old guitarist George Kooijmans and his 15-year-old neighbour Rinus Gerritsen, they were initially known as the Golden Earrings but adopted their latter name in 1967. Vocalist Barry Hay joined in 1968 and Caesar Zuderwijk came aboard in 1970, and that lineup stayed together for the next 51 years until founding member George Kooijmans was diagnosed with a form of motor neuron disease in 2021. Actually, Golden Earring had quite a lot of success outside of their native Holland. They toured with such luminaries as Jimi Hendrix, Led Zeppelin, Rush, Santana, and even headlined over Aerosmith and Kiss during their time. They also had 2 North American hits in the early 1980s with The Twilight Zone and When the Lady Smiles. They even appeared on a Dutch postage stamp for their 50th anniversary in 2011. Hats off to Golden Earring. 1. ZZ Top, 51 years. Formed in Houston, Texas in 1969 by guitarist vocalist Billy Gibbons, this blues boogie southern rock outfit had a few musicians come and go in the first year, but soon settled in 1970 with drummer Frank Beard, the only one without a beard, and bassist keyboardist Dusty Hill. And those three stayed together until Hill's death in 2021. ZZ Top first found mainstream success in 1973 with their third album Tres Hombres, thanks to the lead-off single LaGrange. But it was in 1983 and the release of their eighth studio album Eliminator that the band became unlikely darlings of the MTV era, thanks to their fun video clips for songs such as Give Me All Your Lovin', Sharp Dressed Man and Legs. And their use of synthesizers and drum machines showed that they weren't stuck in the past. Eliminator went on to sell over 11 million copies worldwide. And ZZ Top are still together. Dusty Hill's place in the band was taken by his bass technician, Elwood Francis, with Hill's full blessing. So that's it, 30 band lineups that all lasted for at least a quarter of a century. Have I missed someone from your neck of the woods? Let me know. And check out some of my other music documentary style videos. And if you've got any ideas for another topic that I should have a look at, let me know in the comments section down below. Okay then, bye for now.